The first time I saw Ryan Maxwell across the crowded room at the Sundance afterparty, I knew he would change my life. I just didn't realize he would destroy it first. The champagne bubbles matched my effervescent mood that night. I had just landed my first supporting role in an indie film after years of bit parts and commercials. At 28, I was finally seeing my dreams materialize, one careful step at a time. My agent had insisted I attend this party, promising it would be full of the right people. I had no idea just how right she would be. Ryan's reputation preceded him, the wunderkind director who had taken Hollywood by storm with his raw, unflinching storytelling. 3 Oscar nominations before 40, and a string of critically acclaimed films that merged arthouse sensibilities with commercial appeal. When he caught my eye from across the room, I felt my heart stutter in my chest. "Alison Crawford," he said, appearing at my elbow with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. "I saw your audition tape for Midnight in Montana. Fascinating work." I nearly dropped my clutch. The project he mentioned was still in pre-production, and I hadn't even heard back about my submission. "You've seen my tape." His smile was disarming, genuine in a way that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "I make it my business to know about promising talent. Would you like to discuss it over dinner tomorrow night?" That was how it began, a whirlwind romance that seemed too perfect to be real. Within weeks, we were the talk of Hollywood. Ryan Maxwell's new muse, the entertainment blogs called me. Every time we appeared together at industry events, the flashbulbs exploded. I felt like I was living in a dream. Sophie, my best friend since drama school, was the first to notice the whispers. "They're saying he has a pattern," she mentioned casually over coffee one morning, 3 months into my relationship with Ryan. "Dating up-and-coming actresses right before his new project's launch." I dismissed her concerns with a wave of my hand. "This is different. You don't see how he is when we're alone. The way he looks at me, the way he talks about our future." But Sophie's words planted a seed of doubt that would take root and grow, fed by small observations I might have otherwise dismissed. The way Ryan's publicist always seemed to know exactly where we'd be dining. How our candid moments kept appearing in entertainment magazines. The carefully crafted social media posts his team suggested I share. "It's just part of the business," Ryan would say, kissing my temple when I expressed concern. "You have to play the game to make it in this town. Trust me, baby. I'm looking out for us both." I wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him. After all, my career was flourishing. I had booked 3 significant roles since we started dating, and there were whispers about me being considered for Ryan's next big project, a psychological thriller he claimed was inspired by my enigmatic presence. Then came the night of the Criterion Collection Gala. I was running late, having spent too long in makeup ensuring I looked perfect for what Ryan had hinted would be an important industry event. As I approached the private room where he was meeting with producers before the main reception, I heard his familiar laugh through the partially open door. "Talent is great, but scandal sells better," Ryan's voice carried clearly. "Trust me, when this story breaks, everyone will be talking about both the film and the dramatic end of Hollywood's favorite new couple. It's all about timing the narrative arc perfectly." I froze, my hand hovering over the door handle. Another voice, his producer, Marcus, chuckled appreciatively. "You always know how to work the angles, Ryan. But this girl seems pretty invested. Are you sure she won't cause problems?" "Alison? She's perfect for the role, both on and off screen. By the time she figures it out, we'll have our publicity, and she'll have a career boost she never could have managed on her own. Everyone wins." The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless and nauseous. The room seemed to spin as pieces clicked into place, all the perfectly timed photo opportunities, the strategic appearances, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered rooms. I had thought I was living a fairy tale. Instead, I was just another character in Ryan Maxwell's carefully scripted production. Taking a shaky breath, I stepped back from the door. The diamonds at my throat, a spontaneous gift that had been photographed extensively last week, felt like they were choking me. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place, a cold, clarifying anger that made my hands steady and my mind sharp. If Ryan Maxwell wanted to play games, he was about to learn he wasn't the only one who could put on a convincing performance. After all, I hadn't spent years studying method acting for nothing. I checked my reflection in a nearby mirror, carefully wiped away the single tear that had escaped, and painted on my most dazzling smile. Then I pushed open the door, ready to begin the most important role of my career, the part of a lifetime that would either make me or break me. The game was on. Revenge, I discovered, requires a particular kind of patience. Each morning, I would wake up beside Ryan, watching his peaceful sleep with a new understanding of how deception could wear such a beautiful mask. My fingers would trace the sharp line of his jaw, and I would wonder how many others had done the same, believing they were special, chosen, destined for greatness under his careful guidance. The Criterion Gala became my own private screen test, a chance to prove I could maintain the facade while my insides churned with acid revelations. Ryan's hand at the small of my back felt like a brand now, each casual touch a reminder of his calculated manipulation. Yet I smiled brilliantly for the cameras, letting him pull me close as flashbulbs exploded around us. "You're radiant tonight," he whispered in my ear, and I wondered if he practiced these lines in front of a mirror, perfecting the exact tone that would make a woman feel like the center of his universe. I leaned into him, playing my part flawlessly. "It's all because of you," I murmured back, the words tasting like ash on my tongue. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had finally become the actress he wanted me to be, just not in the way he intended. The following weeks became an exercise in strategic vulnerability. I let him see exactly what he expected, an ambitious ingenue, gradually falling deeper under his spell. Meanwhile, I began my own careful investigation. Late at night, while Ryan was away at pre-production meetings, I pieced together the pattern Sophie had warned me about. There was Jessica Torres, who had a meteoric rise during the filming of Ryan's breakthrough film Midnight Crossing, only to disappear from Hollywood altogether after their very public breakup coincided with the movie's release. Maria Chen, whose promising career somehow stalled after she and Ryan ended things just as Dark Waters Rising hit theaters. Each woman's story was a breadcrumb leading to a truth I was only beginning to understand. "You seem different lately," Sophie observed over lunch, her eyes sharp with concern. "More focused, maybe. Or just, harder somehow." I stirred my untouched salad, choosing my words carefully. "I'm learning a lot about the industry. About what it takes to succeed." "From Ryan?" The skepticism in her voice was clear. "In a way." I met her gaze steadily. "He's teaching me more than he realizes." The real revelation came during a dinner party at Marcus's Bel Air mansion. I had perfected the art of becoming wallpaper by then, present but overlooked, nursing the same glass of wine all evening as I drifted between conversations. That's how I overheard Marcus's wife, Caroline, speaking to another producer's spouse in hushed, wine-loosened tones. "It's the same story every time," Caroline sighed, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured. "Ryan finds these talented girls, convinces them they're his muse, his great inspiration. Then when the movie's about to release, scandal, heartbreak, headlines. The girls get a career bump from the publicity, sure, but they're marked after that. Damaged goods. No one wants to risk hiring Ryan Maxwell's leftovers." My hand tightened around my wine glass as Caroline continued, "The worst part. He's got it down to a science now. Even has a timeline mapped out, 3 months of private dating, 2 months of public appearances, then the big dramatic split right before premiere night. Like clockwork." I did the math in my head. We were entering month 5 of our relationship. Ryan's new film, Beautiful Monsters, was set to premiere in 6 weeks. That night, I lay awake beside him, studying the precise timeline of my own orchestrated downfall. The premiere would be the culmination of his plan, the night he would ensure my public humiliation would drive headlines and ticket sales in equal measure. Every detail of our relationship had been leading to that moment, each loving gesture a carefully placed stepping stone on the path to my destruction. But as I watched the moonlight paint shadows across his sleeping face, a new clarity emerged. Ryan Maxwell wasn't the only one who could craft a compelling narrative. He had taught me well, perhaps too well, about timing, about public perception, about the power of a perfectly executed scene. I slipped from the bed and padded to my laptop, pulling up the contact information for Diane Malone, an independent director known for her unflinching documentaries about power and corruption in Hollywood. Hands steady, heart racing, I began to type. Dear Ms. Malone, I have a story you might be interested in. It's about power, manipulation, and the costly price of ambition in this town. But more importantly, it's about how the stories we tell can either trap us or set us free. The cursor blinked expectantly, like a metronome counting down to the final act. As I began to write, I felt the last vestiges of the naive, trusting woman I had been fall away. In her place rose someone stronger, someone who understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served under hot studio lights, with the whole world watching. Ryan had wanted to make me a star. He was about to get his wish, just not in the role he had planned. It's remarkable how grief can become a silent companion, walking beside you through the mundane moments of deceit. Each morning, I would apply my makeup with surgical precision, watching my reflection transform into the woman Ryan thought he had created. The irony was exquisite, he had wanted to mold me into his perfect ingenue, never realizing he was instead crafting his own nemesis. Diane Malone's response came within hours of my late-night email. Her interest was immediate, razor-sharp, and dangerous. We met in a small cafe in Los Feliz, far from the usual industry haunts where Ryan's carefully placed eyes might spot us. She listened without interruption as I laid out the pattern, the calculated destruction of promising careers, the artistic predation masked as mentorship. Why now? She asked finally, her dark eyes studying me with the same intensity she brought to her acclaimed documentaries. What made you different from the others? The question hung between us like smoke, acrid and revealing. Because I refused to be another cautionary tale, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Because every woman he's destroyed thought she was alone. I want them to know they never were. The truth was more complex, layered like the roles I had spent years studying. Each morning in Ryan's bed had become a masterclass in method acting, every touch, every whispered endearment a scene to be perfected. I was living inside the skin of a woman in love while beneath that performance, my real self was transforming into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Sophie noticed the change during our weekly coffee dates, though she misread its nature. You seem happier, she observed, stirring her latte. More confident. Maybe Ryan's actually good for you. I let her believe it, adding another layer to my performance. The truth was, I had never felt more alone, more acutely aware of the razor's edge between power and vulnerability. Every industry event became a chess match, each public appearance a careful calculation. I watched Ryan work the room at parties, noting how he would casually mention my name to influential directors, planting seeds for my inevitable fall from grace. The script for Beautiful Monsters arrived on a Tuesday morning. Ryan brought it himself, wrapped in blue silk like a peace offering or a poison apple. I wrote this role for you, he said, his eyes bright with what I once would have mistaken for love. It's about transformation, about the price of ambition. I think you'll find it resonant. I read it that night, each page a revelation of his unconscious confessions. The protagonist, a young artist, discovers her mentor is secretly destroying her work, replacing it with inferior copies to maintain his own reputation. Her descent into paranoia and eventual public breakdown would be Oscar bait in the hands of the right actress. In Ryan's mind, it would also parallel my own impending destruction. It's perfect, I told him over dinner, watching his satisfaction bloom. The way she trusts him completely, never seeing the betrayal until it's too late, it's absolutely haunting. What I didn't tell him was how the script had become my own personal playbook, a step-by-step guide to the kind of psychological manipulation he had perfected. Each scene was a window into his methodology, revealing the careful way he built trust before shattering it for maximum impact. Diane's documentary was taking shape in secret, a shadow growing longer as the premiere of Beautiful Monsters approached. Former actresses spoke in hushed tones about their experiences, producers' wives shared whispered confidences, and a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Ryan Maxwell wasn't just creating art, he was destroying lives and calling it creativity. The weight of their stories settled into my bones, transforming my personal vendetta into something larger, more vital. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about breaking a cycle that had silenced too many voices, crushed too many dreams. In my darkest moments, usually in the pre-dawn hours when the line between performance and reality blurred, I wondered if I had become what I despised. Was I any different from Ryan, crafting a narrative of destruction under the guise of justice? The question would echo in my mind until I remembered Jessica Torres's vacant eyes in her last interview, Maria Chen's trembling hands at the Dark Waters Rising premiere. No, this wasn't just destruction for destruction's sake. This was resurrection disguised as revenge, a phoenix moment not just for me, but for every woman who had been forced to rise from the ashes of Ryan Maxwell's ambition. The premiere was 20 days away. My performance was perfect, my plan was in motion, and Ryan Maxwell was about to learn that some monsters are beautiful indeed, right until the moment they strike. The countdown to the premiere of Beautiful Monsters ticked like a metronome in my blood, each day another heartbeat closer to revelation. Ryan grew more attentive as the date approached, his calculated affection landing like acid rain on my skin. Every brush of his lips against my temple felt like a promise of destruction, each tender word a blade wrapped in silk. During our final pre-premiere interview with Entertainment Weekly, I watched him weave our love story with the precision of a master manipulator. "There's something almost mystical about finding your muse," he said, his hand possessive on my knee. "Allison brings out something raw and real in my work. This film wouldn't exist without her inspiration." I smiled, remembering Jessica Torres's words from Diane's documentary footage, "He makes you feel like a masterpiece, right until he decides to burn down the gallery." The camera flashed, capturing what would appear to be a moment of adoring contemplation. Only I knew it was the look of a woman mentally rehearsing the steps of her own salvation. The first crack in Ryan's perfectly orchestrated facade appeared 3 days before the premiere. A blind item appeared on a prominent industry blog, which acclaimed director's reputation for launching starlets' careers masks a darker pattern of psychological manipulation and career sabotage. I found him in his home office that evening, phone pressed to his ear as he paced like a caged predator. "Find out who leaked it," he snapped at his publicist. "And get me everything you have on Allison's past. Every audition, every relationship, every skeleton. We need options." The irony of his panic tasted like vintage wine on my tongue, sweet, complex, intoxicating. I had learned from the best, after all. Every leak, every whisper, every shadow of doubt had been orchestrated with the same meticulous care he brought to destroying careers. The difference was, I had built in something he never bothered with, truth as an armor against his inevitable retaliation. That night, he held me closer than usual, his embrace a prison of false comfort. "You know I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "Everything I do, every move I make in this industry, it's all for us." I turned in his arms, studying the planes of his face that I had once found so mesmerizing. "I know exactly who you are, Ryan," I replied, letting truth color my words for the first time in months. He mistook my meaning for devotion, never hearing the steel beneath the velvet. The next morning, another story broke, an anonymous source revealing Ryan's pattern of dating actresses before his film releases, complete with a timeline of his previous relationships and their suspicious correlation with his movie's premieres. By lunch, 3 more entertainment sites had picked up the story. By dinner, his publicist had released a statement dismissing the claims as baseless attempts to tarnish a celebrated artist's reputation. I watched him unravel with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a specimen. The man who had orchestrated so many perfect destructions had never prepared for his own. Each new revelation was a chip in his carefully maintained facade, exposing the rot beneath the glamour. "Someone's trying to destroy me," he raged during our final dress fitting for the premiere. "They're trying to turn our love story into some kind of calculated publicity stunt." The bitter laugh nearly escaped my throat. Instead, I reached for his hand, playing my role until the final curtain. "Then we'll face it together," I promised, knowing each word would soon become another nail in his coffin of hubris. What Ryan had never understood, what none of them had realized, was that true power lay not in the ability to destroy, but in the patience to wait for the perfect moment of revelation. I had learned to wrap truth in layers of performance, each act of apparent devotion concealing the blade that would eventually find its mark. Diane's documentary was complete now, a devastating exposé ready to be released the day after the premiere. But it wasn't just about Ryan anymore. It had become a testimony to every woman who had been used as a prop in someone else's story, every artist who had been forced to smile while watching their dreams burn. The night before the premiere, I stood before my bathroom mirror, rehearsing not lines but truths. Tomorrow, I would walk the red carpet beside the man who had thought to make me his greatest victim. I would smile for the cameras, play the adoring muse one last time. And then, when all eyes were upon us, when his triumph seemed most complete, I would show him the true meaning of a perfect performance. "Ready for tomorrow?" Ryan called from the bedroom, his voice warm with anticipated victory. "More than you know," I answered, my reflection showing me a woman transformed by the very fire meant to destroy her. "It's going to be a night no one will forget." The morning of the premiere dawned like a held breath, each moment suspended in the crystalline clarity of anticipation. I watched the sunrise paint Ryan's Malibu bedroom in shades of judgment, crimson and gold streaming across the sheets where so many false promises had been whispered. The irony of this final morning felt like poetry written in bitter ink, the last time I would wake beside the man who had tried to write my tragedy, yet had inadvertently penned his own. My phone illuminated with a message from Diane, "Everything is in place. Are you ready?" The question echoed through the chambers of my consciousness, stirring memories of every carefully orchestrated step that had led to this moment. Ready was a relative term when you were about to set fire to the Hollywood hierarchy while wearing couture. The house came alive with the artificial energy of premiere day preparations. Makeup artists, stylists, and Ryan's ever-present team of handlers descended like a well-choreographed invasion. I sat before the vanity, watching them construct the final version of the ingenue Ryan thought he had created, their brushes and combs crafting a masterpiece of calculated innocence. "You seem so calm," my makeup artist remarked, adding another layer of armor to my facade. "Most actresses are nervous wrecks before their big premiere." I met my reflection's gaze, seeing the steel beneath the silk. "I've been rehearsing for this moment longer than anyone realizes." Ryan appeared behind me, freshly showered and radiating the confident charm that had once seemed so genuine. His hands settled on my shoulders, our eyes meeting in the mirror's unforgiving testimony. "Tonight's going to change everything," he promised, his smile holding secrets he thought were his alone. "Yes," I agreed, covering his hand with mine. "It certainly will." The day unfolded like a series of scenes from someone else's life, the final dress fitting, the carefully timed Instagram posts, the practiced sound bites for red carpet interviews. Each moment was a thread in the tapestry of destruction I had spent months weaving. Ryan's publicist hovered nearby, phone perpetually pressed to her ear as she worked to contain the growing whispers about her client's mysterious pattern of relationships. In the limousine, threading through LA's arterial highways toward the premiere, I felt the weight of every woman who had sat in this same seat before me. Jessica, Maria, and countless others, each one carefully selected, meticulously groomed, and precisely discarded. Their ghosts rode with us, witnesses to the culmination of a story that had been repeating itself for too long. "Remember," Ryan murmured, straightening his tie, "they're going to ask about us, about how we fell in love during filming. Stick to the narrative we discussed. It's all about authenticity." The laugh that threatened to escape my throat would have shattered windows. Authenticity, coming from the man who had turned manipulation into an art form, who had built his career on the broken dreams of women he claimed to inspire. Instead, I turned to him with eyes that had learned to lie as beautifully as his own. I promised to give them a story they'll never forget. The premiere venue rose before us like a modern coliseum, red carpet extending like a crimson tongue ready to swallow more sacrificial lambs. Camera flashes erupted as our car door opened, the air electric with anticipation. This was Ryan's favorite part, the moment of presentation, where he would unveil his latest creation to a world eager to consume another fairy tale. But fairy tales, I had learned, were just prettier versions of cautionary tales. And tonight, the caution would finally fall on the one who had thought himself the author rather than a character. My phone vibrated one final time, Diane confirming that Entertainment Tonight, Variety, and The Hollywood Reporter were all poised to break the story simultaneously, their exposés carefully timed to detonate just as Ryan's triumph seemed complete. The documentary footage was ready, the testimonies of past victims compiled into an undeniable pattern of predation. As I took Ryan's arm, preparing to ascend the steps that would lead to his downfall, I felt a profound shift in the universe, or perhaps just in myself. The trembling ingenue he had discovered at that Sundance party had been reduced to ashes in the inferno of his manipulation. But from those ashes, something far more dangerous had risen. "I love you," he whispered for the cameras, playing his part perfectly one last time. Looking up at him, I allowed myself to savor the moment, this final scene before the curtain fell and the true performance began. "Oh, Ryan," I replied, my voice carrying a weight he couldn't yet comprehend, "you really should have been more careful about the monsters you created." The red carpet unfurled before us like a river of blood, each step carrying us closer to the moment when artifice would shatter and truth would finally bare its teeth. Camera flashes exploded around us in a symphony of anticipated destruction, capturing what the world believed to be Hollywood's most captivating love story. They had no idea they were documenting its execution. Ryan's hand pressed against my lower back, proprietary and proud, as we paused for the wall of photographers. "You're trembling," he murmured, misreading my contained fury for nerves. His smile was radiant with the certainty of a man who believed himself to be the author of everyone else's story. I turned to him, allowing every camera to capture my expression of perfect adoration. "Tonight feels like a dream," I replied, each word carefully chosen, sharpened by months of waiting. The irony tasted like expensive wine, the kind he would order to celebrate after destroying another woman's career. The pre-screening reception flowed like a carefully choreographed dance, every movement calculated for maximum impact. Industry players circled us like elegant sharks, offering congratulations that rang hollow in the charged air. I watched Ryan work the room, noting how he'd position me like a prize trophy before subtly undermining me in conversations with influential directors. To anyone else, his techniques would have been invisible. But I had learned to read his performance like a script, seeing the calculated cruelty beneath each charming gesture. 5 minutes to the screening, his assistant announced, and I felt the weight of destiny settle around my shoulders like a crown of thorns. Ryan gathered everyone's attention, champagne flute raised in a toast. "Before we begin, I want to thank the woman who inspired every frame of this film. Allison, my muse, my heart." He turned to me, his eyes shining with what a younger, more naive version of myself would have mistaken for love. "This movie is as much yours as it is mine." The room erupted in appreciative murmurs, but I heard only the echo of Jessica Torres's broken whisper from Diane's documentary. "He called me his muse too, right before he made sure no one would ever hire me again." I stepped forward, taking the microphone with hands that had learned to steady themselves in the face of earthquakes. The room hushed, expecting the usual gracious, adoring response of a grateful ingenue. Ryan's smile encouraged me, confident in his control of the narrative. "You're right, Ryan. This story belongs to both of us." My voice carried clearly through the suddenly silent room. "In fact, it belongs to all of us. To Jessica. To Maria. To every woman you've used and discarded in your pursuit of publicity." The champagne flute in his hand trembled almost imperceptibly as understanding began to dawn in his eyes. Behind him, the massive screen flickered to life, not with the opening scenes of Beautiful Monsters, but with Diane's documentary. Jessica's tear-stained face filled the screen, followed by Maria's haunted eyes, each woman sharing their story of calculated destruction. "What is this?" Ryan's voice cracked, his perfect facade splitting like thin ice under pressure. He moved toward the projection booth, but it was too late. The truth was already unspooling before Hollywood's gathered elite. "This is your masterpiece, Ryan. The one you've been directing for years without realizing it." I turned to address the stunned crowd. "The pattern is beautiful in its precision. Find a promising actress, make her believe she's special, use the relationship for publicity, then orchestrate a career-destroying scandal just in time for the movie's release. The only variable was how many dreams you would shatter along the way." The room erupted in chaos as reporters' phones began buzzing with the simultaneous release of multiple exposés. Ryan's publicist pushed through the crowd, her face ashen, but there would be no containing this story. I had learned from the best, after all, timing was everything. "You can't do this," Ryan hissed, grabbing my arm. "I made you. Without me, you're nothing." I met his gaze, feeling the last chains of fear and doubt fall away. "No, Ryan. You didn't make me. You just showed me who I really am. And unlike your other muses, I learned how to write my own ending." The next day's headlines wrote themselves: "Director's pattern of manipulation exposed, Hollywood's dark secret, the Ryan Maxwell method, rising star turns tables on predatory director." But the story that mattered most was the one that wouldn't make the papers, the quiet revolution of women in the industry finally seeing their shared experience named and known. 6 months later, I stood on another red carpet, this time for an independent film I had chosen for myself. The director, a woman who had fought her own battles against industry prejudice, had written a role that spoke to my soul rather than my marketability. The cameras still flashed, but their light felt different now, illuminating rather than exposing. Sophie found me at the after-party, her eyes bright with pride. "You changed everything, you know. Not just for yourself, but for all of them." I smiled, thinking of the women who had reached out in the aftermath, sharing their own stories of survival and resilience. "We changed everything," I corrected her. "Every woman who refused to let her tragedy become someone else's triumphant third act." The last time I saw Ryan was from across a crowded restaurant 6 months after the premiere. He was alone, his once magnetic presence diminished by truth's harsh light. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I felt neither victory nor vengeance, only the quiet certainty that some monsters need to be exposed rather than slain, their power dissolving in the simple act of being seen for what they truly are. I had entered Hollywood believing in fairy tales and found instead a horror story. But in the end, I had learned the most important lesson of all: the most powerful role a woman can play is herself, unscripted and unafraid, writing her own story in letters of fire and truth.